everybody, Mike here with Delta Faucet. Today I'm going to walk you through how to install the Delta Clarifi 2-stage under-sink advanced water filtration system. Now before we jump in, let's go over a few important things you'll need to know. First, you'll need a hole in your countertop or your sink to install the beverage faucet, and that faucet must be in place before installing the filtration system. If you haven't done that yet, don't worry, we have a separate video that covers those steps. Next, check the installation instructions included in the box for the exact dimensions of the unit to make sure it'll fit in your chosen location. Now the system must be installed in an upright position and kept away from freezing temperatures, direct sunlight, or excess heat. Picking the right spot helps protect the system and also makes it easier when it's time to change the filters. It's also important to note that the system should only be connected to a cold water supply. Now, if you're looking for guidance on changing the filters, we've got you covered. We have a separate video that walks you through that process too. All right, now that we've covered the basics, let's gather the tools and supplies that we'll need to get started. You're gonna need a drill, a 1/4-inch drill bit for pilot holes, a Phillips head screwdriver, a bucket, an adjustable wrench, a towel for some light water cleanup, a pencil, some tape to keep your template in place, maybe something to cut some PEX tubing, some safety glasses, and some gloves. All right, now that you have those tools and supplies gathered, let's dive into the installation. Here we are under my kitchen sink at the location we're going to be installing the filtration system. Now the first thing you'll notice is I've taken a moment to go ahead and clear everything out of the cabinet to ensure I have the maximum workspace possible. Also, I have a towel for some light water cleanup and an adjustable wrench. Now before we dive in, I think it's a good idea to take a moment to just kind of visualize where you're going to be installing the system. We want to kind of think through things like making sure it's installed out of direct sunlight and away from any sort of hazardous chemicals or really anything else that could cause damage to the system itself. Also, if there's a heat source under here, we want to make sure it's installed away from that. And finally, we also want to confirm that it is being installed indoors. Another thing I like to think through is also that this system is going to be connected back to our cold water supply and to our beverage faucet through some tubing. So we want to make sure that the unit and that tubing that's going to be connected isn't interfere with the normal function of our faucet, our drain, or our supply lines. Now for my application here, we're going to be installing it on the right-hand side of my cabinet. However, if the best spot for your application is a little bit further away from that cold water supply or your beverage faucet, just keep in mind that the tubing that ships with the system is a set length. So there is a chance you may have to go to the hardware store and get an extension hose, which should be readily available. Now, one thing you'll also notice is that my beverage faucet is already installed. Now, if you haven't done that yet, don't worry, we have another video that will walk you through those installation steps, so be sure to go check that out and then come back here and we'll pick up where we left off. Another thing you may notice is the beverage faucet I've selected for my install can also be hooked up to a reverse osmosis system, so I have a couple extra tubes hanging down here that you may not at home. Now, since we're not going to be using those tubes for this install, there's a waste and a drain line, these two white ones here. I'm just going to carefully kind of coil them up and then tuck them towards the back of the cabinet since I won't be using them for this filtration system install. So I'm going to take a moment to go ahead and do that now. Okay, now that we have those tubes tucked up and out of the way, we can move on to making our connections to our cold water supply stop. Now the first thing we want to do for this step is making sure that both of our hot and our cold supply stops are in the off position. I also think it's a good idea to go ahead and make sure that your faucet handle is in the open position to relieve any residual pressure that may be trapped within the lines before we disconnect them. With all that said, we're going to be disconnecting our cold supply line running to our faucet from the cold supply stop. Now you may notice here that since I have a Delta Touch faucet installed in my application that I have this additional check valve here. If you don't have that check valve, that's totally fine. We just want to make sure we're removing all of the supply line and any valves that may exist off of the supply stop itself. So I'm going to take my adjustable wrench, just loosen this up, and start pulling off these supply lines. All right, now that we have the supply line to our faucet disconnected from our cold supply stop, we can start making some of the connections to our T-adapter. So the first thing I'm gonna do is grab one of the two included lengths of tube that comes with your filtration system. Doesn't matter which one, they're exactly the same. I'm gonna make this one my inlet tube. So I'm gonna grab one side of the tube and then take my threaded nut, and you'll see the nut has a threaded end. I wanna make sure that's facing the end of my tube. And I'm gonna take this little plastic sleeve, also known as a ferrule, and push it down over the end of the tube. Once I've got it there, I'm going to take my nut and gently slide it back up over the end of the ferrule, like that. Now this is ready to be connected to our T adapter. Now the T adapter is just that. You see it has a female side on the bottom and then two male sides, one at the top and one on the side. I'm going to connect my inlet tube here to the side of my T adapter. So I'm going to gently place it over the end and start threading it on, making sure it's not cross-threaded until it's nice and snug. Now at this point, I'm going to take a moment to go ahead and tighten this up using a crescent wrench just to ensure it's snug. I don't want to over-tighten this. So I'm going to take my T adapter, place it over the top of my cold stop here, and just gently start threading it down into place. Once I feel it snug, I'm going to take my adjustable wrench again, just give it another turn or two to make sure I've got a good watertight connection. All right, that feels good and snug. Next, since I had that check valve, I'm going to go ahead and reinstall the check valve back to my faucet, top of the T adapter. Same as before, just hand tighten it and then using my adjustable wrench to make sure I've got it nice and tight on there. And then finally, my faucet supply line back down to the top of either my T adapter or the check valve if you have it. All right, we have our T adapter installed and our faucet reconnected, so now we can move on to mounting our filtration unit. Now, if you remember from before, I'm going to be mounting my unit on my sidewall here. And you got to keep in mind there are some clearances we need to maintain when determining the exact location of this unit, both the sides, the bottom, and even the top. Delta has included a handy template with your packaging materials here with your filtration unit. Now the template, when you unfold it, you'll see shows the exact size of the filtration unit and also gives you the required clearances to both sides, the bottom, and also the top. So I'm just going to take my template here, moving inside the cabinet, and I'm going to determine my final mounting location. Now what I'm looking for here is making sure that I've got my required clearances again to the front, the back, the bottom, and also the top, and I'm happy with where this is going to be mounted. Now once I'm happy with the location, I'm going to take a couple pieces of tape to hold my template in place, and then I'm going to be using two mounting screws, one at each one of these little locations towards the outsides where the two lines intersect. So give me just a moment to go ahead and tape this template in place. Okay, now with our template taped in place, we can move on to installing our mounting screws. Now, depending on the surface you're installing these screws in, you may need to pre-drill these holes and use the included anchors to ensure a secure fit. Now, either way you're doing this, either with the screws or with the included anchors, we just want to be aware of what's behind the surface that we're installing these mounting screws into. Just be aware if there's any electrical, plumbing, or really anything else back there that could be an issue before you start drilling holes or installing these screws. So, when you're ready, let's grab a drill and install these mounting screws. Now that we have our mounting screws in place, we can secure our filtration unit manifold to our mounting surface. So here's the manifold itself. If you see on the back side, it has those mounting holes that are going to correspond with those screws that we just secured in place. So I'm going to take my manifold, again keeping an eye on these mounting holes in the back, slide them over your mounting screws, and then give it just a little bit of a push down to ensure it's sitting securely on those mounting screws that we installed earlier. All right, so now what we're looking for here is two things. One, we want to make sure that our manifold is sitting level, and two, we want to make sure that it's securely fastened to our mounting surface. If your manifold feels a little bit loose, you can go ahead and pull it back off and then use a screwdriver to tighten up each one of those mounting screws, say like a quarter or a half turn at a time, until this manifold is sitting securely in place. All right, everything looks good here, so let's go ahead and move on to the next step. Now that we have our manifold in place, we can move on to making all of our water line connections. So the first connection I'm going to be making is with the inlet tube. That's the one that comes off of that T adapter that we installed on top of the cold water stop. Now you can see in our cabinet here that access to my inlet tube is on the side of the manifold. I'm going to be making the connection to the left side of the manifold. And when I'm back here, it's kind of a tight space here. I can't really see what I'm doing. So a little bit of a pro tip is I can always pull this manifold off, and I'll show you the side of it. You can see I know this is the inlet because it says in on the side of it. Also, I want to point out that these lines here are going to be a 1/4 inch PEX line that we're making the connection to. And these lines are able to be cut. If we do have to cut them to make them a little bit shorter, I just want to make sure that we're making the cut smooth and straight, and also you'll see there's a little reference line that's about 5/8 of an inch from the end of the tube. I recommend going ahead and making another reference line from wherever your cut line is. That helps us ensure that we're getting enough of the tubing inserted into the manifold before locking it into place to ensure a watertight connection. For me, I'm just going to kind of do like a loop here and then install the tube into the side of my manifold. And when I do this, I'm going to line it up straight up and down and then push it straight down until I see that reference line disappear. Now I've got it fully seated in there. I'm going to give it just a slight tug up, give myself a little bit of space underneath that white ring, and then put in this blue locking clip to hold everything into place to ensure nothing comes loose. All right, now that I have this inlet line connection made, I'm going to install my manifold back onto my mounting screws. And as I do this, I just want to pay attention to the tube, making sure it's not getting kinked as I'm reinstalling the manifold. Okay. That looks pretty good. So now we have our inlet connection made, we can move on to making the connection to our outlet port. Now the outlet port's on the opposite side of the manifold, the right side, and I know it's the outlet because it has the word out on it. Now I do want to talk about how this connection is going to be made. Again, it's going to be with a 1/4 inch PEX line, and one comes included with your filtration system. However, if your beverage faucet has an integrated 1/4 inch PEX line like mine does here, I can make this connection from the beverage faucet directly to the side of the manifold. Another thing I do want to point out is you may have selected a beverage faucet that has a different type of supply line, which is totally okay. Just be aware that you may need to get a coupling to basically use the 1/4 inch PEX line that comes included with your filtration system to convert that 1/4 inch PEX line to whatever your supply line is for your beverage faucet. Also, your filtration system comes with this little coupler here that's an elbow. This can serve two purposes. The first is it can help us ensure that none of our tubes are going to be kinked by giving us a little bit extra space here if we have space constraint. And secondly, we could also use this as one end to give a little bit of an extension by using the 1/4 inch PEX line from our beverage faucet and then the included line with our system if this manifold is located a little bit further away from our beverage faucet. Okay, with all that said, let's go ahead and make our outlet tube connection. So again, I'm going to be using the integrated PEX line that comes with my beverage faucet. Just keeping an eye to make sure nothing is getting kinked. And just like before, I'm going to line it up and then push it in roughly about 5/8 of an inch. Okay, now that I have it inserted, I'm gonna give just a little bit of a pull back here and then use this blue locking clip behind that white ring to ensure a good tight connection. All right, we have all of our connections made now, so the last thing I wanna check is make sure that nothing's being kinked. So I'm gonna check my inlet tube, make sure everything looks good, and also my outlet tube, making sure that I don't see any kinks. If everything looks good, then that wraps up this step and we can move on to installing our battery pack. The battery pack is this black box that comes included with your filtration system. It has a spot for 3 AA batteries and then also a power cable coming out of one side. So what we're gonna do is first open the battery pack by releasing these 2 locking clips on the side here and then opening the door. And on the inside, you can see this is where we put those 3 AA batteries. When you're installing these, just be careful to keep a close eye on the orientation as they're shown on the back of the battery pack to make sure we're getting them in the right spot. I'm gonna go ahead and load these up. And then once I have my batteries installed, I'm going to close the door and lock it back in place with those 2 locking clips. Now that we have our batteries loaded, we can mount the battery pack. Now there's 2 ways to mount it. First, you can use the adhesive that comes preloaded on the back of the pack itself, or you can even use a little bit of a screw or a nail and hang the battery pack if that works better for your application. If you do use a screw or a nail, just be aware, like we did with the mounting screws, of what you're screwing into to ensure we're not going to make a bigger issue down the road. So, next thing we need to do is choose a location for the battery pack. And what I'm looking for here is a location that's accessible and also within the reach of the power wire. So for me, I'm probably gonna choose right down here because that keeps me clear of the filters, of the door, of anything else, gives me good access to the battery pack, and then also I still have plenty of power wire length here to make that connection to my manifold. So I'm gonna make the connection using the adhesive. Just gonna peel off the backing here. Make sure that my battery pack's straight up and down in a good spot. Press it into place. Next, I'm gonna be routing my power wire and plugging it into the side of the manifold that's the same side as my outlet tube. I'm just gonna keep an eye on the wire to make sure it's not gonna get pinched anywhere, and then make that connection into the side of the manifold. If I've done it right, you should hear a little bit of a beep, and then also the display will light up just for a second. Okay, now that I have that battery pack installed, we can move on to installing our filters. So this filtration is a two-stage system, which means we have two filters. I'm gonna go ahead and unpack the filters first, removing the protective film from them and also the protective cap on the top. All right, now that I have them unwrapped, there's one more plug that we have to take out, and it's these two little plugs at the top of each filter called sealing plugs. There's these little black plugs here. I can pull them out and then discard them. Now at this point on the back of each filter, you'll see there's a little spot to write the install date, so go ahead and do that now. Once you've done that, we're going to inspect both filters for any signs of damage. I'm going to check the entire housing from the top to the bottom, paying close attention to the very top here and these little O-rings, making sure they all look like they're in good working order and seated in their correct positions. That one looks good. And that one looks good as well. Perfect. Now we get to install our filters. Now I want to point out that there are two separate filters and they're different. You'll see one is labeled with a number 1 and one is labeled with a number 2. We want to make sure that we're replacing both filters at the same time and that we're getting the number 1 in the number 1 spot of the manifold and the number 2 filter in with the number 2. So I'm going to start with my number 1 filter here. All right, so first I'm going to be installing the number 1 filter here with the number 1 on it into the number 1 side of the manifold. Now the filter itself, you'll see at the top, has these 2 ports with the O-rings on them, and then also this key here. I want to make sure I'm holding the filter with the key facing the front to start. I'm going to gently push it up underneath my manifold until I kind of feel it seat into position. Kind of give it like a little turn back and forth until you'll feel it kind of set down in position, and I'm going to give it a quarter turn counterclockwise to lock it into place. Same thing with the number 2. Again, number 2 on my filter, going to the number 2 side of my manifold. I'm going to keep an eye on the key on the front of the filter, making sure it's facing out. Bring it gently to the bottom of my number 2 side until I feel it seat in position, and then a quarter turn counterclockwise to lock that into place as well. Now that we have our filters installed, that about wraps up all the connections here underneath the sink. Now at this point, I want to make sure that the handle to my faucet is in the off position. Once I've done that, I'm going to turn on both of my hot and my cold water supply stops. Then we can move on to flushing our lines, which basically means running some water through the filtration system to remove any air or carbon particles that may be trapped inside. So to do this, I'm going to be turning on my beverage faucet and letting it run for say about like 10 minutes. Now while this is running, I think it's a great idea to come back down here and double check all of my connections to make sure I don't see any evidence of leaks that may need to be corrected. So I'm going to be checking that T-stop on top of my cold water supply, all of my inlet tubes into the manifold, and also my outlet tube coming out the side of the manifold and running up to my beverage faucet. If there's no leaks and everything looks good, then we're about wrapped up under here and we can move back up top to our beverage faucet. Okay, it's been about 10 minutes, so I've gone ahead and shut off the flow of water, which completes the flushing of our system. And that wraps up the install. We hope it went well for you at home, and remember, if you have any additional questions, you can always reach out to the Delta Faucet customer service team. They're more than happy to help.